Good morning, everybody. My name is William Blackerby. I am the president of the board of directors of Alabama Arise. It is so good to be with you today. Thank you for introducing yourselves in the chat over there. Please keep that information coming. Let us know your name and your city. It's so good to see everyone's name and where they're from. We will have Spanish language interpretation available. You'll be able to switch language at the bottom of the screen on the right. And our two Spanish language interpreters, Ron and Melissa, are here in the panel as well, who can help with that. Closed captioning is available for those who need it. That button is also at the bottom of your screen towards the right. And join us on social media today as well. You can follow Arise at Alabama Arise on both Facebook and Twitter, and use the hashtag Arise2021 to tweet or share about our 2021 agenda. Thank you all for being here. We've got almost 500 people registered for this. We've got people still coming in. It is great to see that. We're so glad that you were able to join us today. I'll give a quick overview of our agenda as well, which you can see on the screen. It includes our year in review here that our executive director, Robin Hayden, is going to give. Our organizing director, Prez Harris, will give an update on our summer listening sessions. We'll hear from Jim Carnes and Carol Gunlock on updates on permanent issue priorities from our policy team today. And as many of you know, the bulk of our time today will be spent on hearing about issue proposal presentations and Q&A for those. We're excited about that. We'll get started with that at about 10:30 today. And we'll have our business meeting towards the end of our time together today, so stick around for that. We'll have some important business items to take care of then, and we'll wrap up around noon, and plenty of time for you to get to the football you'd like to watch this afternoon, perhaps. All right. If you have questions during the meeting today, please feel free to drop those in the chat box where you are currently putting in your name and your city, where you're from. Put those in there. Don't forget to introduce yourself if you haven't done so already.
William, I think we need to let Ron, our Spanish language interpreter, do a brief intro about how the simultaneous interpretation will work. Ron, are you on the phone?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, good morning.
Okay, good morning. Thank you. I had a few technological issues, but was able to overcome them. Good morning, my name is Ron Garcia Fogarty, and I'm with Tilde Language Justice Cooperative, and I'm here with my co-interpreter, Melissa Morrill, who some of you know as well from Deep South Language Interpreting. Hola, soy Ron García Fogarty, estoy aquí con la Cooperativa de Justicia de Lenguaje Tilde, y estoy aquí con mi co-intérprete, Melissa Morrill, quien también la conocen por Deep South Language Services. We're going to be providing simultaneous interpreting today. And what that means is that we have Zoom with interpretation. And everybody should have the option at this point to be able to select a channel. And you can do that at the very bottom of the screen. You should have an option to, has that been enabled yet, Robin? Or is that still going to be enabled? I don't see it as an option yet.
I'm sorry, I'm getting to it. And
okay.
Ron, I'm sorry,
sure.
Should I make your Spanish language the co-host or the Michael one?
Yeah, sorry. The one that saves Michael.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Add interpreter.
Okay, un segundo, un minuto, están habilitando la interpretación. Just a minute, they're enabling interpretation, and we'll explain how that works as soon as that's enabled. Vamos a explicar cómo funciona una vez que la habiliten.
So, to Spanish. Okay. I think it's done. There
Great.
you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So now you should all be able to see at the bottom of your screen, you should have a little button, a little globe if you're connecting with your computer. If you're connecting with your phone, you should click on the three dots on the menu at the bottom. And after clicking on those three dots, there'll be an option to select interpreting. Entonces, para poder escoger un canal de idioma, necesitan ir a la parte de abajo de la pantalla, van a ver un globito donde pueden, si se conectaron por computadora, van a ver el globo, pueden hacer clic ahí y escoger su idioma para escuchar. O sea, si quieren escuchar la interpretación al español, escogen español. Si se conectaron por teléfono, vayan al menú de abajo y hagan clic en los tres puntitos y luego va a haber la opción de escoger interpretación a inglés o español y ahí pueden escoger su idioma para poder escuchar la interpretación. So a couple more notes. If you are bilingual, you do not need to join any of the channels. You only need to join a channel if you need to listen in either English or in Spanish. There will be potentially participation in both languages. So if you want to be a full participant and understand everything that's being said, you should join either the English language to be able to listen interpreting in English or the Spanish channel. Entonces, si usted es bilingüe, no necesita conectarse con un canal de idioma, solo lo necesita si necesita escuchar interpretación hacia el español o hacia el inglés. Entonces, esta reunión va a ser potencialmente en ambos idiomas, con participación plena, participación posible en ambos idiomas. Entonces, si quieren poder participar y escuchar, entender todo lo que se está diciendo, tienen que escoger un canal de idioma. A few final reminders to, of course, speak one person at a time, to speak clearly into your microphone, and to also not speak too fast. And we make an extra point on that so that we're able to follow as interpreters everything that's being said. Entonces, unos recordatorios finales, que hable una persona a la vez, que hablen claramente a su micrófono y que por favor no hablen demasiado rápido para que nosotros como intérpretes podamos seguir lo que se está diciendo y poder interpretar de manera adecuada. I think that's about it. Robin, is there anything else you want to add? Creo que eso es todo. Robin, ¿algo más para agregar?
So some people are saying they can't hear anything. Unless you are a Spanish speaker, you do not need to change your language. So
Okay.
you should be hearing us. I don't think you need to change between English or Spanish, right?
Oh, Robin, I think the issue was that my phone was assigned as an interpreter. I wonder if maybe that's why they were not able to hear me. So if you can, and I'm sorry, that was an issue on my side, not being able to log in on time. So only my computer should be the one that says Michael. And sorry, I should rename that one.
Okay. I'm sorry. Well, I have Michael as co-host. So I need to, is it right?
So that's the one that needs to be assigned as a co-interpreter. That Ron Garcia should not be assigned as co-interpreter. So let me just rename that.
Okay. Do I need to change something then on my end?
Yeah, if you can go back, click on interpretation on the globe, and look at the names that you assigned as interpreters.
Okay, hang on, y'all. I'm gonna have to stop the
Sure.
share. Okay.
So there should be two accounts that you assign as interpreter.
Yeah, I did Ron Spanish language interpretation. That's not the right one.
Let's see.
I think you need to switch them, Press.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. If you can
Okay.
switch them.
Okay.
I think somebody renamed my phone maybe, and so
So it should be the Michael one. Okay. Hold on, let me remove that one. Sorry.
So somebody says that they can now hear the Spanish.
They can?
Yeah.
Okay. I have Melissa. I only have one assigned now, which is Melissa.
Okay. Can you also assign the one that says Ron-interpreter?
Yes, let me, for some reason, let's see, there it is. All right. I'm sorry, y'all. Bear with us on the technology. Okay. What about now? I made the assignment. Is it okay? I guess it's working. Okay. Okay. I think you can continue, William. I'll go back to screen share.
All right, William, you want to do some intros?
Yes.
Happy to. I'm happy to. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for bearing with us. We are really excited to get started here with this. Like I said earlier, if you're just joining us, please introduce yourself in the chat with your name and your city. And we will get started here momentarily. Let's see. So we have, spoken about the agenda a little bit. Can we look at the slide with the vision statement on there?
Hey, Prez, I can't hear you. So I think, William, can you read? Do you want me to read the vision statement?
I'm happy to do that.
I'm sorry, y'all. Hang on.
No worries. No worries.
Okay. Sorry, y'all. We were having other technical difficulties on the other end. Sorry.
Okay. No worries. No worries. Well, I will jump into our Arise vision statement here. Alabama Arise is a statewide nonprofit, nonpartisan coalition of 158 faith-based nonprofit and civic groups and over 1,700 individual members united in our belief that people in poverty are suffering because of state policy decisions. Arise believes that charity alone is not enough to address poverty. In order to realize our vision for our state, where everyone has what they need to thrive, we must unite to change policy for the better. For over 30 years, our annual meeting has determined our agenda, an agenda driven by you, our members. We're so glad that you're attending our meeting today to help determine our agenda for 2021. And before we get started here, I'd like to ask the Reverend Carolyn Foster, who is our board secretary, to give us a few words of welcome.
Thank you, William. I bring you greetings from the board and staff of Alabama Arise. As William said, I am Reverend Carolyn Foster, and I'm privileged to serve as secretary of the board of directors. We have lived under extraordinary circumstances for several months now. The pandemic has amplified the suffering of poor and low-income individuals in this nation and in our beloved state of Alabama. The need for an organization like Alabama Arise has never been more essential than right now, where individuals and member groups join together to advocate for and promote state policies where everyone has equal access and equal opportunities so they can not only survive, but to truly thrive. Thank you for being here to help us seek the best way forward that leads to opportunity, equity, and fairness for those who need it most. Now, if you would, let us pray together. O God, source of our grace, love, and compassion, grant us a vision for Alabama as your love would have it, an Alabama where the weak are protected and none go hungry or poor, an Alabama where the riches of creation are shared and everyone can enjoy them, an Alabama where different races and cultures live in harmony and mutual respect, an Alabama where peace is built with justice and justice is guided by love. Gracious Lord, you have bound us together in a common life. Help us in the midst of our struggles for justice and truth to work together with mutual forbearance and respect. Enable us to eliminate poverty, prejudice, and oppression, and grant that every one of us may enjoy a fair portion of the riches of this land. During this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, we pray for all affected by this virus in any way, including the President and First Lady, and all in the White House or government who have been infected by this virus. May their weakness be banished, their strength restored, and their health renewed, enabling them to see your mighty hand at work so they may bless your holy name, having been transformed by your love. May we all say, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Carolyn. I want to say thank you to everyone for being here this morning. We're running a little bit behind trying to get the interpretation going correctly, and I appreciate your patience. Thank you all for asking questions. I wanted to mention that Juliet and Debbie are our tech support in the chat box if you really are having trouble hearing or seeing anything. And we are going to record this meeting, so if you miss pieces of it, you can share it with others or watch it later. I have a really brief report to give about the year in review. It's kind of daunting to think about reporting on this past year. You know, it feels like it's been about a decade since our last annual meeting. And frankly, I'm having a hard time keeping up with the past 24 hours of news. I think, as Carolyn has sort of set the tone for us today, we're in serious times, facing serious political crises, failures in leadership, a huge health crisis that has taken the lives of far too many people, economic suffering that we haven't seen in this country in decades. And I wanted to take a minute to celebrate the work that your support and advocacy has done this year. I wanted to acknowledge that these are really difficult times and celebrate some of the progress that we're making, because this is the time when we have to lean into the work, which is policy, advocacy, and organizing to build power for people. Regardless of what happens in November, while we're all struggling to make it through so many crises on multiple fronts, we still have to show up in the halls of power in Montgomery, anywhere policies are being made, to speak out for the people, to build power for workers, to build power for our communities. So that's what we're here to talk about today and to cast our vision for. Prez, if you don't mind moving on to the next slide, I just wanted to briefly look back at the legislative session that happened. This was only 7 months ago. We had hundreds of people packed in a small room. We did a press conference with, this is our board vice chair, Anna Delia, speaking about untaxing groceries. And then a short 2 weeks after that, we had the very first committee hearing we've had on a bill to untax groceries in over a decade. It's a huge step forward for our state that we now have Republican and Democratic legislators united in this acknowledgement that our tax code is upside down and that we need tax fairness. We testified to support this bill in early March, and things were going along. And then the very next weekend, COVID hit, and it hit hard. So our office at Arise has been closed since mid-March. We canceled all of our in-person organizing meetings. And I really miss seeing all of your faces today. I do want to mark the fact that this is probably going to be the most participation we've ever had at an annual meeting, because this is our first all virtual event. So while there are things that I really miss about being all gathered together in one place and seeing all your faces, I'm really grateful that this is allowing us to be more inclusive, to allow closed captioning and simultaneous interpretation, which I hope is working by now. And it is, it's going to allow even more of our members and partners to decide on our agenda this year. So thank you for being a part of that. Can you move to the next slide? So this is what COVID has looked like for us for the past 6.5 months. This is our board and our staff. We're doing Zoom meetings, we're calling people one-on-one, and mostly we're mobilizing our resources as quickly as possible to respond to this crisis. We know that defending our social safety net, expanding our social safety net, advocating with our state administrators and leaders to get support out and relief out to those who need it has been our top priority. Protecting the health of our staff and our members is also a key priority. Speaking out in every media channel that we can. I cannot believe the number of media hits that our communications team and our policy team have handled this year. On every front, on all of the issues we work on, from workers' rights to healthcare, prison reform and jail justice, so many issues right now are just incredibly urgent, and our staff and board have really stepped up to show leadership and to get the information out that needs to get out. Next slide, please. So we think facts still matter, and a key part of our mission is to put out good information that you can use in your communities to mobilize people and to get them the resources we need. We've had an unprecedented number of action alerts, of sign-on letters, communications about federal, state, local policy, administrative responses. Next slide. And this has also been a key year for us in terms of putting out, just updating the types of data and policy analysis we can provide. So I hope you all got a copy of our Medicaid Matters report, which came out in June. I hope you saw some of the workforce data that we've been ramping up. It's a time for us to say, we know what the problems are, and we know that we cannot solve the problem of COVID relief and racial justice without focusing on the people who are directly impacted and centering their voices in the response. Next slide, please. We also launched the Cover Alabama Coalition in mid-April. This was a little bit earlier than we planned to publicly launch our Medicaid Expansion Coalition. It launched with over 70 partner groups, and we're now up to 94 partners. We felt that it was time to show publicly, as much as we could, how much broad-based support there is for Medicaid expansion. And we're going to continue to push really hard moving into 2021. Next slide, please. Finally, this was just a tremendous year for us, for all of us, in illustrating the deep racial inequity and disparity in our society. It was not a time for us to back down on our commitment to highlighting racial equity. We came out with a joint statement with the NAACP and GBM a few months ago calling for the resignation of Representative Will Dismukes, who was openly affiliated with white supremacist KKK celebrations. We came out in support of racial justice protests. We believe that strongly that racial justice is a key part of economic justice. We're not going to address the deep systemic inequality in our state without addressing racism and white supremacy. I do want to highlight here one opportunity we all have in the November election. On November 3rd, there is a constitutional amendment to remove outdated and racist language from our state constitution. Arise does have a position on this amendment. We support it strongly. We hope that if you're already going to vote absentee, early voting is open through absentee, or if you plan to vote in person, that you will vote yes on Amendment 4. Next slide, please. The last thing I want to celebrate from this year that's continuing is the number of new staff we've been able to bring onto our team. We've really been leaning into the challenges of this year, and since our last meeting last October, we've brought on 4 new staff members. Well, we hope to be adding a 5th new staff member soon. So welcome to Salida Soto Garcia. She's our hunger advocacy coordinator. She's doing fascinating and amazing work with our policy team. And through Salida's efforts this past year alone, we think more than 15,000 Alabama school children are now going to have access to community eligibility for free lunch and school breakfast, which is tremendous progress. Jane came on as our Cover Alabama campaign director in June, and she just hit the ground running. It's really hard to start a new job in the middle of COVID, and we're so glad to have her on board. Whitney Washington and Whit Sides both just started within the past few weeks. Whitney on our communications team and Whit as our story collector with our Cover Alabama Coalition. I'm so glad to have so many new staff on board to grow our capacity and lean into the work that we've all committed to do. So I'm now going to hand things over to Pres Delane Harris. She's our organizing director. She's also running this whole meeting, and I want to say thank you so much to Pres for all the planning that she and her team have done to get us ready to all meet together remotely today. I'm so grateful for her leadership on our staff. Here you go, Pres.
All right. Thank you, Robin, and thank you all. Some of you I've had the pleasure of talking to, and I thank you so much for your grace with us doing this all remote meeting. And there were some technical glitches, but hey, we're gonna weather it and get through it. And thank you all. I want to welcome you. Tell you how much I appreciate you being members and supporters of Arise. And just, I'll go pretty quickly to try to get us back on track with some of the time. But I wanted to report out just, many of you were part of the town hall listening sessions that we did this year. And this, what you see on the screen is just a snapshot from one of those sessions. Arise is committed to listening to our members, to our allies, but most importantly, to folk who are affected by the work, directly affected by the work that we do together. And we depend on what we hear to help guide our work and strategies. And that's why we had to be really creative to figure out how we could still hear from folks in this time of COVID. So we did this series of 6 Town Hall Tuesdays from June to September 1st, every 2 weeks, and about 65 of you showed up for each of these calls, and we had breakout sessions. And if you want to read the details of the notes from the breakout sessions, you can go to our website, and under our recent blog, it has links into those notes if you really want to get down into it. But just quickly, some of the things that we heard from members and supporters, we heard affirmation for our work around Medicaid expansion, untaxing groceries, and our other current issues. We heard a lot of empathy from folk who were concerned about people who are living in vulnerable circumstances, even being more stressed and strained by the pandemic. Concern about barriers to voting, the ongoing attacks on our voting rights, desire to see more resources for our immigrant neighbors. We also heard more alarm about payday and title lending, and many were passionate and concerned about housing, living wages, gender equality, gun safety, juvenile justice reform, defunding the police, census, environmental justice, food insecurity, and education. But most of all, I appreciate the willingness that you all expressed to do work, to keep on pressing in these times to make a change and hope that Alabama could be better and that we can make it better. One last thing I want to speak to is just the census. We've done a lot of work around the census. Mike Nicholson has been our lead organizer on that work, and we've identified many of you, our members, who are helping to get the word out. We coordinated a series of volunteers who helped text hard to count populations to encourage participation. And Mike has represented ARISE in larger statewide efforts promoting the census. And the new census deadline is, after much back and forth, we understand is back to October 31st. So we're still working to encourage folks to, I didn't advance my own slide, encourage folks to complete the census and work with people in your areas to help them get that completed. That's my report.
Over to Jim now.
And Jim, I'm gonna stop sharing and hand it off to you.
Thank you, Press. I want to join Robin and Press in welcoming everyone and thanking you for spending a part of your beautiful Saturday with us here at ARISE. I'm going to turn the microphone over to my colleague, to introduce our Carol, are you there? Country, and she may be having.
I am here now. I am very rural for other people from rural areas, and sometimes my internet is not happy with me. I want to talk a little bit about what the impact of the pandemic has been on our state budgets. We've been watching this very carefully, as has our legislative and gubernatorial leadership, because of course, Alabama is dependent on taxes to pay for the services that we need so badly in this state. Luckily for us, there was really good revenue growth in Alabama for the first part of the year up until the time of the pandemic. So we kind of entered this pandemic period with a cushion. We needed that cushion because beginning in April, revenue growth for the state governments just plummeted. Court costs went down very sharply, and court costs are very important because if we do not raise court costs, we cannot pay for the operations of our courts. It's a very serious problem. And the courts were closed, so costs went down. Income tax revenue went way, way down very quickly because a lot of people lost their jobs. Luckily, the good news for the state budgets was that the general fund growth that pays for mental health services, child welfare services, corrections, all the services we depend on, is going to come out of the year probably with about a 7% increase. Not as good as we had hoped, but certainly better than it could have been. Education budgets so far this year, because they're so dependent on income taxes, are going to eke out the year with less than a 4% growth, but at least we're not seeing cuts. Can I have the next slide, Jim? Thank you. The general fund was really helped by the voluntary internet sales tax. It's called the simplifier seller's tax, but basically it's a tax that we pay whenever we buy something on Amazon or another internet seller. And it's grown by $69 million since 2018, which is a significant growth, and it's continuing to grow.
That's right.
And then the ETF was saved by an internal savings account that transferred money. So we should be okay in 2021. We will see about 2022. Next. Okay, but our budgets don't meet the basic needs of the state. There's no money for Medicaid expansion, for prison alternatives to incarceration, not enough money for K-12 education or higher ed, no state money at all for childcare, and no state money for affordable housing or public transportation, or for mental health services, or too little for mental health services, and too little for early intervention with children with disabilities. And that the whole issue of what we do for our youngest children was really brought to a rise by the Fairhope Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, which asked us to consider prioritizing the expansion of Alabama's pre-K program. It's one of the best in the nation, and we should be really proud of what we're doing for the youngest of our children. Unfortunately, we're only serving a very small percentage of the eligible children. There are still 22,000 children in Alabama we could be serving if we had more money. So altogether, we need another $96 million, and that's a lot of money. Oh no, another $213 million, which is a lot of money to make pre-K universal. But we want to try to chip away and expand that program over the next couple of years to help more families with real low incomes educate their children, save money on child care, and do what's best for the state and for building our workforce and our population. We are looking at revenue options, and there are a number of them. And Jim, if I could have the next slide, I think that's where revenue options are. Indeed. The solution to Alabama's budget problems, including pre-K, including everything we're not funding, is to fix our broken tax system. We could get rid of the state income tax deduction for federal income taxes, which would raise a significant amount of money for Medicaid expansion and many other services, particularly education. We can make our tax system more progressive by taxing the wealthy at a higher level than we tax ordinary folks. We could impose a temporary tax on millionaires. We could help improve our collection of corporate income taxes by adopting combined reporting, which merely means that it makes it harder for them to dodge state income taxes. And of course, we could help everybody by eliminating the state sales tax on groceries and replacing that lost revenue by increased income taxes on the rich. We could apply sales and use taxes to professional services like oil change services and haircuts and all the things that we pay for other people to do for us, and increase and impose taxes on digital goods and services, the downloads and the videos we watch, all those things that are not taxed now. We could increase taxes on unhealthy food items, such as sugary soft drinks and sugary foods that increase our costs for Medicaid and other health care because they are so bad for our health. And particularly next year, we are going to have to be looking for regressive and expensive proposed changes to the corporate income tax. Those are going to be introduced kind of as a mechanism to avoid charging you and me for any taxes on the stimulus checks that we got. That's going to be the what we're going to hear from legislators. But there also are going to be including some very regressive corporate tax changes that help rich corporations, particularly the auto industry, and are going to cost state education budgets lots and lots of money. So we're really going to have to be working for bad stuff as well as good stuff. So, Jim, I think you were, if I remember correctly, you were going to cover the safety net defense work.
Sure. Thank you, Carolyn. I'm going to speed up a little bit to try to regain some of our time.
Good.
as many of our speakers have mentioned, COVID has really thrown a monkey wrench into everything we do, and our defense of the safety net has really come to the fore. Our hunger team, Carol and Salida, have been working tirelessly to help school systems understand how best to meet the nutritional needs of their students, and that's really paying off. We're getting a lot of uptake on those programs. We have, in general, we have seen a break from some of the attacks on the safety net. Having the legislature out of town early means that they really couldn't attack Medicaid in the way that they had been in previous sessions. So we have two areas I want to highlight. I mentioned the school nutrition, and then on the Medicaid side, which I'll talk about a little more in a second, we've had a great opportunity to press for Alabama Medicaid to use all of the flexibilities in their toolbox to address the new needs introduced by the pandemic. And many of those needs have to do with access to services during a shutdown. When doctors' offices are on limited capacity, people can't get out, they're not supposed to get out. So we've had a lot of luck and success with getting Alabama Medicaid to be, in some cases, a pioneer in some of those flexibilities. We presented an agenda to Governor Ivey, and I have to credit her. She's really making a pretty good start at protecting Alabama during this time. One of the things we're starting to look ahead for is how can we analyze, evaluate, and preserve the best COVID measures Alabama has adopted and make them permanent. So I had a meeting just this week about some of that in Medicaid, and I think our leaders are starting to realize we're in a forced experiment right now that is teaching us some very useful lessons for the future. And I hope that we're going to see some great improvements coming out of this for the post-COVID era. Now, I want to just briefly touch on three aspects of our Medicaid work. As I mentioned, the legislature has been gone, and they've kind of let up on some of their Medicaid attacks, but I do want to highlight a win. At last year's annual meeting, we celebrated all of the advocacy we were able to muster against the proposed Medicaid work requirement. I can report that the state has backed off on that effort. It is just no longer an issue. And the federal side has recognized also that is pretty much a non-starter. They are still interested in trying to figure out a way to introduce block grants, but I'm not very worried about that right now. On our reform work, we have had a year of great activity on our consumer representation. You know, ARISE has the privilege of appointing consumer representatives to the Medicaid regional coordinated health networks and to the statewide long-term care network, the integrated care. And those representatives have been very active. Debbie Smith on our staff is helping to coordinate some professional development and further training for those representatives. Press and her team have been working down in Mobile with a neighborhood to try something brand new, and that is to try to use community voices to influence how Medicaid approaches its effort to improve quality measures, specifically obesity. This community has identified itself as a food desert, and they're interested in Medicaid policies that can help them address that. And then lastly, on that count, our consumer representatives were able to push Medicaid to begin for the very first time providing bed bug eradication treatment for home-based long-term care patients who formerly had to simply have their services suspended because Medicaid did not have a policy or a plan for addressing bed bugs. Robin has already mentioned our hiring of Jane on the coalition side and Whit on the story collection side. So I think that will bring us up to this federal update. I wish I had more good news to report on the federal side, but there is one piece of good news. The Congress passed and the president signed a continuing resolution that keeps the government open for a few weeks, but it also includes some longer term provisions. And one of those is that the resolution preserves the pandemic EBT program for the entire 2021 fiscal year. That means that families whose student meals are disrupted because of school closures and remote learning will now receive the equivalent cost of those meals on an EBT card, so that the loss of the student lunch and breakfast doesn't impose an extra hardship on the family budget. So Carol and Salita have really worked hard to make Alabama the first Southern state that adopted this program. And now we're really pleased that we'll be able to continue it for another year. On the broader COVID relief side, we're kind of at a stalemate, as you probably know. The House passed a second version of the HEROES Act that it passed earlier in the year. They dropped considerably their budget request, dropped it to $2.2 billion, but we don't have an indication yet from the Senate or the White House as to what their next move will be. So stay tuned for that. And I'm going to toss the microphone to William for the issue presentations.
Great, thank you, Jim. Okay. At this point in our agenda, we're inviting our member groups to present our 2021 issue priority proposals. Arise member groups are invited to submit issue proposals each summer, but it's up to you, our membership, to determine which issues we'll work on through policy, advocacy, and organizing. A little bit of ground rules housekeeping for this. Each presenter will have 5 minutes to present their slides, plus 5 minutes for moderated Q&A. I'll be the timekeeper, and I'll give a verbal 30-second heads up as that 5 minutes for presentation is coming to an end. For the Q&A, we invite you to submit your questions through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And like I said, I'll be the timekeeper. We've got 7 issues to get through. So it's important to stay on track. And if I need to step in and help wrap things up there, that comes from a place of helping us stay on time and also making sure people are on equal footing for their issue proposals here. We'll have 5 minutes for Q&A as well. And we'll get started here momentarily. 5 of the issues being presented today were issues that Arise previously worked on in 2020, and 2 are brand new issue proposals. So only 5 of these issues will make it on our 2021 priority agenda. First up, we'll invite Dylan Nettles of ACLU Alabama to present a modified issue proposal. Dylan is presenting on the issue of criminal justice reform. For the past few years, Arise has worked on criminal justice debt and fines and fees, and then expanded that issue to include civil asset forfeiture reform. This year, many of our partners, including ACLU, are working on broader criminal justice reforms, including sentencing reforms. Our board looked at this proposal from ACLU to address sentencing reform and felt it was clearly linked and could be combined into an expanded issue priority. So this issue proposal has been modified to encompass a broader set of related criminal justice bills. Thank you, Dylan. We'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, William. As you already mentioned, my name is Dylan Nettles. I'm the policy analyst for the ACLU of Alabama, and I'm really excited to join you all this morning for this issue presentation. As William also noted, we know that previously ARISE has supported a range of criminal justice issues such as fines and fees, ending suspension of driver's licenses for debt, elimination of cash bail, and a lot of other issues that the ACLU is really passionate and been proud to stand in support of. But we really think that this piece on habitual offender law I'm going to be speaking with you about today is where we have to go to truly achieve the level of robust reform that's necessary in Alabama to address the crisis in our criminal justice system. So I'm going to start off by talking about the history of Alabama's habitual offender felony act, which is really also, it could be considered just Alabama's three strikes law. That's what a lot of folks are probably more familiar with hearing. It's about three strikes laws. In 1976, federal judge Frank Johnson found Alabama's prisons to be overcrowded, violent, and, quote, wholly unfit for human habitation. That didn't stop Alabama's legislature, unfortunately, from passing the Habitual Felony Offender Act in 1977, 1 year after Judge Johnson's landmark ruling. And this new law was considered the harshest in the nation because of its ironclad mandatory punishments. That's those three strikes that I noted. One, a life without parole sentence for anyone convicted of a Class A offense with any three prior felonies on the record. And another one of those ironclad punishments is a life sentence for anyone who was convicted of a Class B felony with any three prior felonies on the record. Yes.
Our interpreters are asking if you could speak a little bit more slowly. Thank you.
Yes, so sorry, trying to get through in the time limit. I'll slow down a bit.
You're great.
So this meant someone could be sentenced to die in prison for a single burglary or robbery and three prior forgery or drug convictions. That's just an example, but there's lots of other kind of combinations that could be happening that lead to these really lengthy sentences. So the outsized punishment really resulted in hundreds of people being sent to prison for the rest of their lives for a handful of offenses committed, many of them when they were young and many involving no bodily injury. It's really important to note here that Alabama has a much more expansive classification of what are considered violent offenses than we see necessarily in other states or even at the federal level. And so this is an issue here that's a part of this law. So Alabama's law is really vastly out of line with similar three strikes laws in other states because it doesn't account for the time between prior offenses, and it doesn't allow for multiple offenses to arise, or it does allow, excuse me, for multiple offenses to arise from a single incident. In 2000, the law was amended, and we believe that this was really to make it less severe. I think the legislature did recognize that the overcrowding was really being driven by this law at that time. And so they took a look at it and they did decide to make an amendment. And so what that did was actually, it led to a decrease. We saw a slight decrease in sentencing at that time. But in 2014, Alabama's legislature repealed the retroactive application of the 2000 amendment, which allowed for all of these folks who had been sentenced prior to have their cases looked at again by the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals. Well, the Court of Criminal Appeals basically said, we don't want to look at all these cases. We don't want to spend our time going back and reducing sentences or basically releasing people. So we're asking the legislature to just get rid of that retroactive application piece and to just apply it for people being sentenced going forward. So that means that there's lots of people who otherwise would be out right now under Alabama's current laws that aren't. Next slide, please. So let's talk about who is in this life without parole population, which is the harshest punishment of the habitual offender law. Well, first of all, the racial disparity is significant. 3 out of 4 people sentenced to die in prison under the Habitual Felony Offender Act are Black. According to the latest data available from the Sentencing Commission, in October 2019, 527 people were serving life without parole for offenses other than murder. And an analysis of the population also revealed at least 300 people serving life without parole under HFOA for no sex offenses on the record. Another 165 have no prior Class A felonies, which means that they wouldn't be sentenced to life without parole today. So just gonna go ahead and jump ahead a bit here to the next slide if we can. The Habitual Felony Offender Act effect on Alabama's prisons was immediate and dramatic, as we've noticed here. So overall, today, Alabama's prisons are more than 170% over capacity, and there are 6,100 people serving longer enhanced sentences under this law. When the law was passed, Alabama prisons incarcerated fewer than 4,000 people. By the year 2000, the system designed to hold 13 was bursting at over 25,000 people. Today, Alabama's prisons are horrifically overcrowded and violent. Sorry, was that the cutoff, William?
Yeah, we're at time.
Okay, sorry about that. We'll leave it there then.
All right. Thank you, Dylan. So we have some time here for questions and answers. Please drop those into the Q&A box there. And going forward, if you have questions while the presenter is speaking, you're more than welcome to put them in there as well.
I'm seeing one, William, from Mark Aldrich. He's asking if you can talk about the prospects of enactment a little bit more.
So prospects of enactment might have to be clarified a bit for me so I make sure I understand the question correctly. But if we're talking kind of like a path to victory here, how this can happen, I was listening as you all were talking at the beginning about this legislative session, and like Arise, of course, at the ACLU, many of our legislative priorities were kind of upended by the sudden closure of the session. But there was actually already serious conversations and some momentum around this. It's really, I think, important to note here that Alabama's criminal justice system has in the last 2 years been hit with two reports, from the U.S. Department of Justice citing Alabama's constitutionally or unconstitutionally rather overcrowded facilities. It's also talked about the lack of staffing, and really Alabama is just failing to be able to maintain this massive overcrowding issue in its facilities. And so there's already a sense of some necessity, frankly, under this even current administration, that Alabama is going to have to act. I think what's also important to note here is, so we have a lot of former lawyers, district attorneys, correctional officers even, and police officers who are in the Alabama legislature. And that does sometimes mean that we are going to have a really kind of tough on crime, law and order approach or response to some of these things. But even then, we've had real support from some legislators when they've seen these breakdowns that I've provided. If we can even go back to the slide just before this one, when I did the breakdown of, actually it might be before that, sorry. When I did the breakdown, yes, here, of people sentenced to LWOP under HFOA, these numbers really strike lawmakers because they suddenly see that this law is actually really harshly punishing people, driving up our incarceration numbers, keeping people sentenced for very long periods of time without any sort of relief that can be provided. You've had people who were sentenced in the 80s and the early 90s who are still sitting today for prior offenses. And these were not necessarily, again, violent acts or these kind of heinous crimes that I think oftentimes even lawmakers think that they are. And so when they get a look at that and they really see here are the people we're talking about, they see that there's actually a real pathway to provide some relief to the overcrowding situation we have in those facilities today.
Great. A couple more questions here. One is, would this initiative provide relief for those currently incarcerated for life?
So it would depend, of course, on when we say currently incarcerated for life, some of those might be capital punishments. However, this would provide, we know that today there are 6,100 people serving longer enhanced sentences under Alabama's Habitual Felony Offender Act. And so we believe that could be to even have those cases reviewed, those that would in fact, again, be qualified for retroactive application, or those that today are still being harshly sentenced because of how restrictive this law is. Those, with repeal of this law could all be reviewed and could be up for sentencing reduction. I think what's important to note, and I didn't get to here as well, is that this isn't saying that by repealing Alabama's Habitual Felony Offender Law that there are suddenly no sentencing guidelines. Actually, the legislature does have sentencing guidelines that have been reviewed, or I guess you could even say enacted, as recently as 2013. Judges have these sentencing standards that they use as kind of a baseline. However, what Habitual Felony Offender Act does is say you have to, these are ironclad again, so these are mandatory punishments based on a prosecutor's choice to prosecute an individual under this law. And so this is not to say that suddenly there are no sentencing guidelines by which judges can go off of. And I think that's one of the reasons that also the legislature has kind of warmed up, and we saw, we had really great conversations with Representative Jim Hill, who is the head of the House Judiciary Committee, about this bill before the legislative session ended, because he knew that this was incredibly important and that the legislature really hasn't been able to get their arms wrapped around it. And I think a lot of those with that prior experience in law enforcement, or even, with being judges themselves, kind of understand that these are really broad, lengthy sentences being doled out, and not necessarily because they don't have other sentencing guidelines that judges can actually go off of and do so with more flexibility.
We got about 10 seconds left for Q&A here, so I'm going to pick a short one. Total number of people in prison now who might benefit from this?
So there are about 6,100 people right now who are sentenced under this law.
Great. Dylan, thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. We got a lot of questions coming in the Q&A that we can't get to all of them, so we appreciate your patience with that. Okay, we're going to move on to our next issue at this point. Next up, we invite Spencer Hahn on behalf of Project Hope to abolish the death penalty to discuss death penalty reform. This is a returning issue on ARISE's agenda. And Spencer, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. It is my privilege to be here today speaking on behalf of Project Hope to abolish the death penalty. For some background, Project Hope to abolish the death penalty, or Project Hope, was founded and is run by inmates, by people who are on Alabama's death row. And there are today 170 people on Alabama's death row. One person on Alabama's death row passed away this week, Arthur Giles, of natural causes. He was the longest serving person on Alabama's death row. But as of today, the number is 170. They obviously can't be here today, so I'm standing in their stead and coming to you to ask you to support death penalty reform in the state of Alabama. Obviously, the long-term goal would be eliminating the death penalty in Alabama, but there are achievable short-term goals. Since last year's meeting, because of the COVID pandemic, there has been one execution, and that would be Nathaniel Woods, who is presently on the screen. Mr. Woods was actually handcuffed and on the ground at the time of the murders for which he was executed. 3 police officers were shot, but Mr. Woods, by all accounts, had no role in pulling the trigger. Next slide, please. And there has been one person who has left death row recently, Christopher Rivas. He's been resentenced to life with the possibility of parole. And Mr. Rivas, ironically enough, received relief because of Batson issues. That is, the prosecutor struck African-American jurors, and as a result, his conviction was vacated. So this year we had a white inmate receive relief and an African-American inmate get killed based on case law that I think a lot of people would say makes the system look a little bizarre. But I would note that advocacy by Alabama Rise Again is the only chance in the legislature for these folks who cannot have the opportunity to advocate for themselves. With the current makeup of the Supreme Court and the likely future makeup of the U.S. Supreme Court, our best shot here is to have Alabama Rise take action at the local level, at the legislature. And next slide, please. So I believe that there are 2 achievable goals in the short term, and that is there was a jury override in the state of Alabama until fairly recently, until 2016, and the legislature did amend the jury override law to prevent judges from sentencing people to death who juries had recommended receive life. Unfortunately, that law is not retroactive, and so there are a number of inmates on death row who were overridden to a death sentence. And I happen to represent one who had 12-0 unanimous jury verdict that the judge overrode to sentence the person to death. So if we could get that law amended, it would certainly assist a great number of people on death row, and it would ensure that everyone was treated equally with regard to the override law. Finally, as far as achievable goals, amending the law to require a unanimous verdict to impose a death sentence. This year, the U.S. Supreme Court, or this term, the U.S. Supreme Court determined that a unanimous verdict was required to convict a person. But unfortunately, right now, the way it stands, Alabama allows a 10-2 verdict. So 10 jurors who vote for death, 2 who vote for life, the judge has to impose a death sentence. If we adopted a system similar to what the federal government uses and many states use, it would require unanimity of the jurors, and absent unanimity, it would require a mandatory life without parole sentence. That's how that has actually functioned fairly well in places like Oregon and the federal system to prevent a higher number of death sentences. Next slide, please. The long-term goal, obviously, given the poverty and the circumstances of most of the folks who are on death row, not surprisingly, they did not have adequate legal representation. They did not have adequate funding for their legal representation. And the long-term goal here that would reduce significantly the population on death row going forward would be to create and adequately fund a statewide office for capital defense and capital post-conviction litigation.
30 seconds left.
The state of Alabama has an attorney general's office, which is that has a capital litigation unit that specializes entirely in this. And the prosecutors throughout the state are obviously well-funded and government funded, and no one ever tries to cut their budgets. But with regard to a long-term goal, perhaps a study, but creating and adequately funding a statewide office would work wonders. In Virginia, where they've done that, they went 5 years without a new death sentence. There's only been 1 new death sentence in the last decade.
It's our time.
We'll take questions.
Great. Okay. For this issue, a question that has come up is, what type of prison reform or reform to the laws would it take to change or eliminate the death penalty?
Well, so eliminating the death penalty is a very long-term goal here in Alabama. I think Alabama is probably likely to need to reach this incrementally. But I think that the 2 points that I'm here advocating for this term are to make retroactive the override, which would remove more than a dozen people from death row right now, and to require a unanimous verdict would result. Absent a unanimous verdict, it would be an automatic life without parole. That would result in a substantial number. Most jury verdicts are not unanimous in this state. That would reduce the numbers significantly. Just an example would be Terry Nichols, who was the co-defendant in the Oklahoma City bombing. He was tried by 2 juries because he was tried federally. And in the federal system, he had an 11-1 for death. He received a life sentence as a result of federal law. Oklahoma then took their chance with him. Oklahoma, of all places, which has a fairly large execution list, has a jury verdict that requires it to be unanimous. And because they went 11-1 for life, Mr. Nichols is serving a life sentence, despite having been involved in the largest domestic terror attack in American history.
Thank you. A couple more things in the Q&A here. One is a reminder that judges in Alabama are elected. And then another question here, does the governor of Alabama have the authority to overturn the ruling by a judge?
Yeah, well, so the governor does have the authority to grant a commutation of a sentence from death to life. However, in modern history, only 1 person has received a commutation, and that was Governor Siegelman commuted a sentence in, I believe it was 1999. Since then, we have presented petitions to the governor for commutation, and we don't ever even get an audience with the governor. Some states like Ohio have an actual hearing that they hold in front of a commission that then makes a recommendation. Here it's very informal. You send a letter to the governor.
Okay, I invite other questions related to this issue. We do have a little bit of time here for this. If anyone wants to put anything related to this specific death penalty reform issue.
and I think Esther Brown here, who's been with Project Hope forever and is a wonderful advocate, points out that the only commutation was a white woman. There is absolutely a racial and gender component to this. Death row in Alabama, there are 5 women on death row. There are 165 men. Despite the fact that African Americans are not 50% of the population, they represent slightly more than 50% of the death row inmates. So there is absolutely a racial component. There is a financial component. And Esther is absolutely right.
Here's another one. We have more progressive district attorneys in some of our largest jurisdictions. Any way we can use that to our advantage?
Well, yeah, obviously, the first step in preventing a death sentence is to keep a prosecutor from bringing a capital case against someone. And so obviously that will be helpful. There are obviously, those are, Jefferson County, Montgomery County are more likely to see a progressive prosecutor, but that's temporary because elections change things. And so if we can get the law changed, we can prevent it statewide. And Christine Freeman, who is with Alabama, the Post-Conviction Relief Project, which finds volunteer counsel for death penalty folks who've been sentenced to death, points out that there are more people on death row from non-unanimous verdicts than there are from unanimous verdicts for death. So it is not common to get a unanimous verdict for death. And we could prevent it just by making it be a requirement of unanimity.
Great. Spencer, thank you. That's our time for Q&A on this issue. We're going to move on to our next one. Let's see here. Next up, we invite Reverend Ramona Russell from Mission Possible to discuss legal malpractice protections. And this is a new issue proposal for RISE members to consider. Whenever you're ready, Reverend Russell.
And Reverend Russell, I was late moving you over, but you're muted, so make sure you unmute yourself. Thank you.
How did you feel when Alabama law required all motor vehicles on our roads to carry liability insurance? Good, right? You felt more secure. This is how having law to require legal malpractice insurance in Alabama will also make you feel. Good morning, Arise family. I am also a law student and an ardent advocate for legal malpractice justice in Alabama. Today, I will talk to you about legal malpractice and the need for legal malpractice insurance and disclosure in Alabama. About 12 years ago, my family and I were victims of legal malpractice. Unfortunately, our attorneys failed to exercise ordinary care. Although we successfully sued our attorneys for legal malpractice, we learned that they did not carry legal malpractice insurance, and they were not required by the State Bar of Alabama to carry this vital coverage, or by Alabama law. Therefore, we recovered almost nothing for compensation. Importantly, far too many of our poor get the same result or worse. Thousands of Alabamians are victims of legal malpractice. Some are aware and many are not. We need to educate and continue to push for law to require attorneys in Alabama to carry and or disclose to their clients whether or not they carry legal malpractice insurance, because too many lawyers provide clients with substandard advice or representation. Alabamians who live in poverty, work for low wages, and have little knowledge are more likely victims of legal malpractice. Therefore, I urge you and ask you kindly to support legal malpractice insurance for Alabama. I plan to attain legal malpractice insurance when I receive my license to practice in Alabama. Currently, Oregon and Idaho are the only states that require attorneys to carry legal malpractice insurance coverage. And 8 states require some form of malpractice insurance disclosure for attorneys. Alabama law requiring attorneys to disclose and or carry insurance will encourage many other states. Please support this vital issue because legal malpractice not only causes financial disparities to our poor, but mental health issues as well. It is better for our consumers to be informed. The poor have very limited recourse against attorneys who fail to exercise ordinary care. Therefore, insurance is needed because many people are too poor to defend themselves in a lawsuit. Thank you kindly. Questions and answers, please.
Thank you, Reverend Russell. All right, so please keep the questions coming in. We have a 2-part question that has come into the Q&A so far. The first is, do we have any quantitative information showing how this impacts the poor? And the second part of this is, what information is there about the results of malpractice claims with and without malpractice insurance?
Yes, that's a loaded question, but quantitative information, like I stated, there are currently 10 states that have implemented legal malpractice insurance requirements. Only 2 that require, that is Oregon and Idaho, and it's 8 states that have some form of legal malpractice disclosure. And as far as people being victims, let me make sure I understand that. Could you repeat that second question, please?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Looking for information about the results of malpractice claims, both with and without malpractice insurance.
Okay. Without malpractice insurance, those are cases that I hear of often. Like I said before, my family and we were victims of legal malpractice insurance, and I have several other people that I have met, and I have their testimony where they was also victims where they was not able to recover and couldn't afford to represent themselves against legal malpractice insurance. And for as results from legal malpractice insurance, its statistics leaning more towards attorneys that have legal malpractice insurance. The percentage of insured law in the state jumped from 60 to 90% after mandatory disclosure. So more attorneys are garnering to have insurance. The Virginia State Bar, it support this statistic. Before it's like a general broad or a specific guideline for the benefits of it, there is no real evidence that I have showed, but I have evidence where a lot of people in Alabama are personally being harmed by attorneys that do not carry or disclose to their clients whether they have legal malpractice insurance. And this issue back in 2017 was endorsed by Arise and Representative Marika Coleman. She supported this issue and drafted a bill with the House to require this requirement. And unfortunately, the bar has tabled the issue. Originally, they said that they would consider implementing this in-house, but as of now, they have not moved forward with this issue. So that's why it's back up for your help.
Okay, thank you. Another question here in about a minute left. What would be the alternatives for a person who was convicted and it could be demonstrated that they were represented by an attorney who didn't provide adequate representation or who gave them bad advice? So really the question is around what alternatives would be for that person.
Well, legal malpractice insurance is put in place. It's put in place to help combat such issues as what you are speaking about. It would defend clients' former attorneys. It would help defend clients from former attorneys that they have claims with, and it would also help allocate resources to clients in the event that their attorneys are found guilty of legal malpractice.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for that, Reverend Russell. And that ends our Q&A time for this. So we're going to move on to our next issue. We're going to invite Bibi McKinley from Tuscaloosa Citizens Against Predatory Practices to discuss payday and title lending reform. This is a returning issue for Arise members to consider. Whenever you're ready, feel free to get started.
And Bibi, I think you need to turn on your mic and your video if you're ready to go. Oh, still don't have your mic on. Let's see.
Now? Okay. When a mouse sees a piece of cheese, he does not see the trap. When he bites the cheese, it's too late. The same is true for a payday loan borrower. He sees the lure of the money, but not the trap. By the time he takes the money, it's too late. He's already begun his descent into debt and possible bankruptcy. Next slide. A borrower can only have $500 worth of loans at one time, and Alabama has a database to take care of this. Interest is $17.50 per $100 borrowed, and you need a paycheck stub or a bank account when you go to a lender. Let's suppose you want to borrow $500. You go in and you give the lender a post-dated check for $587.50. That's $500 for the loan and $87.50 for interest. You have 2 weeks to pay the entire amount, not a portion of it, but the entire amount. However, if you can't pay that, but you can pay the $87.50 interest, they will give you a new loan for 2 more weeks. That pays off your old loan, and now you have a new loan for $587.50. And this is what they want. At the end of 3 months, you have paid $525, but nothing on the principal. If you can't pay the $87.50, the lender can cash that post-dated check. And of course, if you don't have any money in the bank, then you are in trouble. And that post-dated check gets first shot at your money, not your utilities or anything like that, that post-dated check. With a title loan, since the lender has a title to the car, a borrower's car can be repossessed in 30 days. And if the amount that the car is sold for is greater than your loan, the lender keeps that amount. You don't get it. Next slide. This shows how quickly you can get deeply in debt and even bankruptcy. And this is what payday lenders want. They want repeat borrowers. Alabama law allows 456% annual percentage rate on a payday loan and 300% on a title loan. And payday lenders are on track to remove more than $1 billion in fees from our communities in the next decade. In 2019, in Alabama, 189,231 people took out $1.6 million in payday loans, worth about $563.6 million. More than 18,000 of these borrowers had 20 or more loans. And every year, Alabama borrowers pay more than $100 million in payday loan fees that do not decrease the principal amount owed. Most of all this money will be siphoned out of neighborhoods and communities that badly need it, and it will go to out-of-state companies. Next slide. A recent study showed that 52.5% of Alabamians support payday lending, banning payday lending, 73.6% support a 36% cap on payday loans, and 74.1% support extending payday loan terms to 30 days, which would also cut the interest rates. Alabama Arise and others have been trying to change laws concerning payday lending for a number of years. The problem is that the lobbyists have a lot of money and the legislators are only too happy to take it. Next slide. In the 2020 legislative session, we tried to get the 30 days to pay bill. Senator Orr was assured that the bill would move forward from the committee. But the difficulty in getting a bill passed was and is getting committee chairs to prioritize bills. I went to Montgomery to make a presentation to the banking committee with others there to do the same thing. After Senator Butler presented the bill to the committee, no one else was called upon. The bill was voted down. That took care of that for the session. There are those who believe that this borrowing and lending should be left up to the free market. They seem to think that a free market solution to the problem of usury is preferable to a simple adjustment to state law. I would remind those having this idea that our current payday lending system has a bad business model. A product that is defective and might harm consumers invites the government to intervene. Think of the automobiles that have had major problems. Think of the cell phones that caught fire. Think of the foods that have been recalled. Problems with bad business models must be addressed, and payday lending in Alabama is one of these. I close with my favorite story. Reverend Scotty McLennan, Dean for Religious Life at Stanford University, said, "Charity is finding a baby, floating down the stream, and pulling it out. Charity is pulling out a second baby and a third baby, pulling them out. Justice is going upstream, finding out who's throwing the babies in and stopping evil at its source. Please help us go to the legislature and stop evil at its source."
All right, thank you. So we've got some time for Q&A now, and a question has come in asking, wasn't there a moratorium placed on Alabama municipalities on the number of payday loans and or title places?
Now, I'm not going to be a good one to answer some of these questions. Somebody from Alabama Arise would be better equipped to do this because I get my information from them. I don't know if there was such a thing.
Dev may want to jump in here, but my recollection was at last count, 22 cities or municipalities have placed some kind of local ordinance in places. But the problem is that they can't close down existing businesses that are already open. They have limited power, so they can have a moratorium on new business licenses being issued. They can have zoning ordinances on how far apart they have to be from existing payday or title places. And you can certainly approach your local city council to ask for those types of moratoriums or zoning ordinances. But, Decatur did that after they already had 52 payday loan stores in one city of 50,000 people. So it's pretty, at that point, the ship has sailed.
Thank you, Robin.
But some of those cities' moratoria were actually temporary and led into their current location-specific zoning restrictions on those sorts of businesses. So a lot of them have expired. Specifically, Northport and Tuscaloosa have expired.
Let's see. Two questions that are somewhat related here. One is, are there suggestions for these existing businesses to have warnings put up or something to educate people about the predatory practice? And similar to that, any focus on education of consumers?
Well, we've had op-eds. I've done 2 or 3 op-eds myself in Tuscaloosa. But I don't know of any other things that are done, you know, word of mouth, go to Montgomery and lobby, but we don't have a formal setup for education to my knowledge.
Can I jump in here and say that, you know, we view our role as public policy intervention, and we do have partners who've worked on payday lending reform with us who do consumer education. They do financial literacy training, and every payday loan shop is required to post interest rates on a big sign in their store. But it's still not clear to borrowers what this model is, and the fact that a whole $500 loan could be due in 2 weeks. And so we do have partners who focus on education. We still think that they shouldn't exist in this form.
And you know, Alabama loses so much money every year that we need. It's going to out-of-state companies.
Got a question here about any kind of progress that may have been made on this issue in recent years. You know, that this has been a returning issue, and I think there might be an interest in an update on what kind of progress has been made.
Well, you know, Senator Orr was assured that it would go out of the committee to the floor last session. And you heard what I said about going to that meeting, the banking committee. They voted it down right then. They are not interested. Maybe we need to publish the names of all the legislators that take money from them, big everywhere. That has been put out in the past.
See, do we have someone who could share a little more on the Northport statement?
That was Robin.
Yes, the story on the Northport restrictions were that the categorical moratorium in place there was put in while the city was trying to figure out basically as much as how they could get away with restricting these businesses as much as possible without getting it thrown out in court. And they came to the conclusion that a lot of other cities have, that they can restrict how close they are to each other under basically a nuisance theory because they are both crime creators and crime attractants, but they don't have the authority to ban the practice entirely at the municipal level, unfortunately. So they did what they could do, and that's where they are now.
Got it. Thank you, Dev. All right, that's our time on Q&A for this one. I'm sorry I can't get to all questions here, but we're going to move ahead to our next issue. Next up, we invite Allison Hamilton from Greater Birmingham Ministries Economic Justice Table to discuss public transportation. This is a returning issue for ARISE members to consider. Whenever you're ready, Allison.
I think you're muted, Allison. There you go.
Hey, sorry, I had some technical difficulties. I don't know what happened there. All right, so public transportation, this is my presentation. So during the civil rights movement, Alabama legislators amended the Constitution to forbid the use of vehicle and fuel tax revenue for anything other than roads, bridges, and traffic regulation. This meant that all public transit systems across the state would have to find their own funding from local sources. Since then, Alabama has lost out on millions in federal matching funds, and what little public transit we have has been deteriorating for decades. As many of you know, in 2018, thanks to Alabama ARISE, the state legislature finally established a public transportation trust fund to work around the constitutional ban. This was a critical first step in getting state and federal funding for public transit services. However, we now need to get money into that fund, money that could be doubled or quadrupled with federal matching grants. Public transportation means more than just convenience for many Alabamians. It is critical for basic mobility for many of us, including differently abled people, seniors, and the many others who can't afford the cost of owning a vehicle. People need a way to get to work, go to doctor's appointments, and get their groceries, and do it on their own schedules. Beyond the clear issues of equity, we are all paying the costs for inadequate transportation. The leading causes of death in Alabama are cardiovascular disease, cancer, respiratory illnesses, and stroke. Particulate air pollution from vehicles has been directly linked to all of these. Alabama also ranks 4th highest in the nation for traffic fatalities. According to our own state's Department of Transportation, we're losing over $20 billion a year from traffic incidents. Research has confirmed that public transit has a major impact in reducing both traffic crashes and air emissions. On these two problems alone, public transportation could potentially save us $1.4 billion in health costs, and those savings could go to better use, like Medicaid expansion. Next slide. So I think we all know there are a lot of issues in need of funding in Alabama, and it is never an easy process to get that funding. For the Public Transportation Fund, we're using an incremental approach, starting with adding the fund as an option for contributions from state income tax refunds. So each year, Alabama residents have the choice to donate some of their tax refund money toward a variety of programs and trusts like the Senior Services Trust Fund and the Alabama Arts Development Fund. We would like to see the Public Transportation Trust Fund added to
That's
the
what they call it, I think.
next slide. So we don't expect this to generate massive amounts of revenue at first, but it would keep the ball rolling as the first designated source of income for the trust. We had hoped to pass this through in 2020, but the legislative session was cut short due to COVID-19. Hopefully this would be an easily attainable goal for next year. Many state legislators have demonstrated support for the trust fund, and this would be a completely voluntary option for taxpayers. Besides establishing a revenue source, it would also be a great way to just inform the general public about the trust fund. So I hope you'll consider supporting the proposal. Public transportation doesn't just get us from point A to point B. It connects people and communities to each other. Thank you. That's it.
You, Allison. We've got some time for Q&A now at this point. Any questions we want to have addressed here regarding this public transportation issue?
I hope that means it's just really obvious.
Yeah. Let's see here. Okay, here we go. Let's see. Can or have municipalities and counties been involved in garnering support for this issue?
Well, I mean, I'm sure somebody from Arise could also probably talk more about this, but I do know, I mean, there have been a lot of efforts in the past to get public transportation income through the legislature in the state. And a lot of times what happens is you get most municipalities and the legislators representing those municipalities on board, but you don't get all of them. So I would say there's, you know, mixed support.
Okay. Another question here. Why is the state against allocated money to the trust fund, especially since it is income generated?
Well, Gosh, you could get into a lot of reasons for why. I mean, I think that a lot of it is just, it's very hard to sell adding a new line item to the budget, right? It's not appealing. That's not a popular thing to do, to add expenses to the state budget, period. And so there are some people that are just going to be against it on that principle. But I mean, you could also, I mean, just considering the fact that this amendment was passed in the first place and the way that it sort of favored roads and bridges. I mean, we do know that interest groups connected with construction and road building and all that stuff, you know, they benefit from the way that things are now. So there's also, you know, some financial interest in preventing public transportation from becoming a major issue.
I have a question here about how the trust fund would be disbursed.
I think I'm going to refer to Alabama Rise for that one because I don't remember.
Okay.
Anybody?
Deb, can you jump in there?
Oh, sorry, I was typing another one. Could we repeat that question that I was specific?
Yeah, I have a question about how the trust fund would be disbursed.
Well, that would really depend upon the necessities of public transportation on any given year. It would go to two separate primary pools for federal matching purposes. Operations and capital expenditures. You get more bang for your buck if you do it for capital expenditures, because the federal government can match up to 4 to 1 as opposed to just doubling investment in the case of operations expenses. So that's where you get the most return on investment from the federal matching.
Deb, could you describe the process through ADECA and how that would work?
In what sense? In terms of the fund being disbursed?
The grants and that sort of thing.
Okay. The ADECA would administer this account and determine through its disbursement processes how to allocate the money. And basically the differing federal matching levels would be one of the factors they consider in addition to public need as to how to send that money out.
Okay. Let's see here.
I see a question about why we can't use gas tax revenue, and I think that was mentioned in the presentation, but basically there's a constitutional amendment banning us from using gas taxes for public transportation. That was a bill that was passed in the 1950s in our Constitution, and we need to get rid of that constitutional amendment. Jim or Deb, do y'all see other questions here? There's a lot of questions.
You got about 30 seconds left for Q&A.
I do see one on disabled Alabama residents in rural areas. That would be like access to public transportation would be increased there through a specific 5310 funding at the federal level that would be subject to those matching requirements. So basically, with state investment in rural areas for disabled riders, we would increase that significantly. It's just a matter of whether the state's going to put that in.
I see a question about using the trust fund money to fix up bus stops, and the idea of the trust fund would be to improve the public transportation infrastructure across the system. So I think a local transit system could propose to use the funds for that purpose as well.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for that, everybody. Thanks for jumping in there. We're going to move on to our next issue. Up next, we have Anna Pritchett from AARP to discuss universal broadband access. This is a new issue for ARISE members to consider. Whenever you're ready, Anna.
Okay, thank you. Are you hearing me okay? I hate when people do that.
Yep.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Anna Pritchett. I'm Advocacy Director for AARP Alabama. Thanks for having me. And I want to congratulate Alabama ARISE and all of you for all of the hard work you've done. I know this year has been exceptionally difficult, and it's great to see everyone participating today. To me, I think the element of broadband is such the perfect issue for Alabama ARISE, and it is particularly timely after what we've really seen bubble to the top during the COVID pandemic. I think everybody is aware of what we've seen with the schools and trying to get access for the kids. And then when you play in the elements of telehealth and all of the different pieces that are affected by the access to broadband, and the idea that the federal funding that's coming down from above to allow expansion is just a great, I think, opportunity for us to step in as advocates to make a difference because of clear racial and economic disparities that you see when you look at the maps. Jim, will you go to the next one? I'm sorry. When you look at the map of where you see we have it access to broadband in Alabama. We have a problem with actually identifying, and I think this is on a national level as much as it is a local level. It depends on where you get your data from. The FCC likes to put out maps of where where they say broadband access is, and then the providers, the telecom and cable and such like to argue about that. The data I got from the FCC says that more than 842,000 people in Alabama don't have access to a wired connection that allows the amount of download speeds that you need for adequate broadband signals, and that over 1 million people in Alabama don't have access to any wired provider. I'm sorry, don't have access to more than one provider, so you don't have a competitive pricing opportunity, and then more than 276,000 people don't have access to any broadband at all. Sorry. If you look at, I looked through some of the research just because I know this group likes numbers, and there's quite a bit out there, but a lot of the most interesting ones that talk about the relationship between the when you drill down to the county level or the neighborhood level, you see a direct relationship. The higher the African American population, the lower the level of broadband access, the lower broadband access is. And you see the same type of relationship when you talk about, I guess in the reverse, the more broadband a community has, as you add broadband access, the jobs increase. So I thought that was very interesting. I'm sorry, I need my glasses to see that, to make sure. Anyhow, I wanted to mention also that on the next slide, sorry. From my perspective, I think what's needed here is, well, what you see in the legislature is kind of the different providers looking for their bottom lines to be reinforced, and who has who can do what. And there tends to be this constant turf battle amongst the marketplace piece of any kind of expansion that the state has been working on, and you see very little conversation about the actual consumers and who it's impacting. So I think, like I said, with the increased interest in broadband over the last couple of years, and now especially because of the pandemic, that this is a great opportunity for advocates to step in to help policymakers see the larger picture, to come up with a larger, long-term strategic plan with many different levels, including targeting certain communities and increasing transparency so that we know where the decisions need to be targeted, or the money needs to be targeted, and that it's not just about grants and money being handed out to local communities, but it is about targeting populations and making sure that it is about universal access and getting people connected. So whether it's about jobs or telehealth or livable communities or civic engagement and registering to vote, that
and that's time. We're
okay.
There. Thank you. We're going to move into Q&A here now. We've had one come in that asks, let's see, what's the outcome of money from CARES to broadband and possible additional funding if Congress passes another stimulus bill?
I don't know.
Are anyone from the Rise policy team who might be able to jump in with that one?
So I will just say, I think we did expect Congress initially to pass a pretty big broadband assistance fund. That hasn't happened yet. I know that Del Marsh was advocating for the $1.8 billion we got in CARES Act money to go for broadband, but it definitely did not seem like it would be an allowable use for that CARES Act money.
You saw them struggling quite a bit because the way that it had to be expended. Isn't that right?
Yes. I believe he was saying it was 900 million of that was what he wanted. I could be off.
The governor did appropriate some CARES Act money for broadband. For some reason, 30 million sticks in my head, but I wouldn't swear to that. But it was mainly targeting school children and helping them get online to go to school remotely.
There was also some money in the CARES Act for telehealth and telemedicine, but the implementation of that has been, the states have a lot of discretion. And so as I understand it, there wasn't a lot of pressure attached to that funding to address the issues of equity and universal access.
Okay. There's a question here asking about counties regulating and keeping a county only having one provider. Is that the usual case? Anyone who can jump in on that one? About the option of available providers in a given area.
What I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
I didn't phrase it well. So we have. I've heard it. That my county, this question asker says, that regulates and keeps inhabitants of that county having only one provider. Is that the usual case? So I think there's the question is about available broadband providers in a given area. Does that make more sense?
It does.
Okay.
I think from what I've seen, you see a very circular argument with the providers about adoption for, we'll expand when you'll adopt kind of conversations. And I know that some counties have actually even gone into business for themselves, like they did with cable. But I'm not aware of, and this, I'm sure the guys at Arise know more. I'm not familiar. I'm sure that there's only one provider in most counties or in a lot of Alabama's counties, but I don't know how the county plays into that.
Okay.
I know that the state legislature had a bill to keep the municipalities out of the business.
Okay.
I'll just point out that because this is a new issue proposal for Arise, we have not had the opportunity to do a lot of research on this issue, but we can perhaps follow up with some of those questions.
Okay.
Got just a little bit of time left here for Q&A, so I'll go to this question. Is there any consideration from advocates for creating public or cooperatively owned broadband utilities in areas without providers?
This is Anna. You know, part of the reason I brought this forward, like I said, is that the consumer is very rarely brought into the conversation in my experience. And so I think other than kind of arm wrestling for territory or grant money amongst the big providers, I don't think anybody's stepping in and saying anything or trying to encourage the marketplace to the advantage of the consumer. And I think that's why the timeliness is so important for Arise to step in. Because I think it will be moving forward whether we're there or not. And I think we all have to be there to speak up on behalf of the consumer.
Great. All right. Thank you, Anna. We're going to move on to our last issue here. Last but not least, we invite Barbara Cadell from the League of Women Voters to discuss their proposal on voting rights. Arise received 3 different proposals this year from groups urging us to expand and sustain our work on voting rights, including proposals from Greater Birmingham Ministries, the League of Women Voters, and First United Methodist Church Anniston. This issue was originally added to our agenda by the Birmingham Friends meeting, who originally proposed that we focus on automatic voter registration. The issue was expanded last year to include a broader set of voting rights reforms. So Barbara, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? I know that sounds like a bad commercial. I wanted to thank you for giving League of Women Voters, it sounded like we had a lot of people to arm wrestle, for giving us this opportunity to talk about voting and to propose some actions to improve the voting process in Alabama. Obviously, I don't need to tell you about the importance of voting. It's the only way to help overcome the poverty, prejudice, and oppression that was mentioned in our invocation. Our proposal focuses on 3 specific aspects of voting rights. The first 2, universal automatic voter registration and voting rights restoration for people who have had felony convictions. Both of those are past issues, and there is legislation, so to speak, in the can on those. The last issue, absentee and early voting, has come into the forefront of our national discussion because of the COVID pandemic. So let's go to the next slide and we'll get into some of the nerdy details. Universal automatic voter registration is an important piece of voting and updating the voting list. Most people don't realize that the Secretary of State is required by federal law to maintain an accurate voting list. So having updated information is critical to having an active and participatory democracy. Currently, because of COVID, organizations like the League of Women Voters are kept off of campuses, and rightly so, because of fear of infection. So the normal thing for us to do every year is to register high school students and college students. Now we can't do that. The opt-in system is a little burdensome for young people as well. And finally, we can't expect high schools to be all things to all families. It's very difficult. I've been a high school teacher, and I can tell you there are too many tasks in one day. So they welcome outside people to come in to help register. Well, all of that is gone by the boards. So how would universal automatic voter registration work? Well, that would mean that when a person turns 18, if they have a driver's license or they have some other connection with the state, they would automatically be registered to vote without having to fill out a form. Then when they update their driver's license, when they deal with food stamps, they are able to update their information. So that helps the Secretary of State keep his voter list current. Another segment of the population, and particularly in the low-income community, they forget to update their voter status when they move. You've got a lot on your mind. If you are experiencing instability in your housing, sending a note to the Board of Registrars is usually the last thing on your agenda. So having an opt-out process rather than an opt-in process for registering to vote can be very, very critical. Let's look at the next slide. Restoration of voting rights for citizens that have felony convictions is an important work that the League of Women Voters has been doing along in collaboration with a wide variety of other organizations. In 2017, the Felony Voter Disqualification Act, let me make sure I get that straight, was enacted to help kind of create some sort of process to help people with felony convictions reintegrate into our civic life. Unfortunately, there are a lot of
30 seconds left.
System. With that, I'm sorry, I'm hearing a voice.
30 seconds left here.
Yikes. Okay, well, obviously we want to fix some of the problems in this. I told you I was going to be a nerd. Let's go to the last slide. No excuse, this is the newest part of our presentation because the pandemic has brought home a need to be able to vote safely without endangering someone's health. This could be and should be expanded to come about in times where there is not a pandemic necessarily, but a way for people who have minimum wage jobs who may not be able to take off work to be able to vote either early or in a less crowded situation.
That's our time.
Sorry. That's what happens when you put a nerd on the screen.
Well, we've got some time for Q&A here, so please put some questions in there and we'll bring those up for discussion. Last time we did this, I think people were all typing and then there was a flood of questions, so we'll give them a little time. Here we go.
Oh, I thought I was so riveting that they were just dumbfounded.
Well, I think they were riveted and typing. So here we go. Let's see. One question is, should absentee ballots have postage-free returnable envelopes? That was the first one that came in.
Yeah, that's a good thing. As you probably already know, the league has filed a lawsuit that got thrown out of court, and the NAACP and the Southern Poverty Law Center and disability rights people are still in court over some of these same issues. We feel that the courts at this point in time are probably not the best avenues for voting reform, that we might do better in the state legislature, particularly now that there's a lot of consternation about how we vote.
Okay. Let's see. What would be the prospects of getting early voting through versus no excuse or absentee is another question that came in.
I think probably from what I understand, and please jump in and correct me if I misspeak, that I know Secretary Merrill has said that the witness requirements for the affidavit envelope that he was in the past he's been in favor of abolishing that. And that eliminates one layer of confusion if you don't have to try to figure out two adults to sign your ballot application. I mean, your ballot submission, not your ballot application, your ballot submission. So that is one thing that we could get traction on. Also, fixing some of the problems in the restoration of voting rights could happen because we have pointed out inconsistencies in the plan, and it's clear that that is not administered statewide in any kind of orderly fashion. So I think that might have some traction as well. I'm open to corrections from the ARISE staff.
All right. Jim, is there anything that jumps out to you in the Q&A?
Well, I see a question about other states. How many other states have adopted automatic registration? 16 states plus the District of Columbia have done that already, but I know that, as Barbara is saying, the pandemic, the election during a pandemic is bringing the conversation forward in many states. So I think that number is likely to change in the near future.
Yeah, and the message we want to get across is that voting needs to be safe, and currently there's a lot of misinformation about voting by mail, about doing anything different. And I think part of our task is going to be establishing a system that is transparent and that we can have confidence in. Because what we don't need is people being so frustrated with the system and being fearful that either their vote won't count or they're going to get sick if they go in person, that people will give up and not vote at all. And that would just be horrible.
Jim, is there maybe one more that jumps out at you with about 30 seconds left here?
Let's see.
Universe in 30 seconds.
Well, I see. Would it be a productive path to advocate making Election Day a state holiday? One creative recommendation that we've seen is to trade one of the Confederate holidays for Election Day. That's not at this point an ARISE position, but it is an interesting approach.
Yes, it is.
All right. Well, thank you, Barbara. Thank you to all our presenters for this. I'm going to move us along here into a brief explanation of our voting process. All right. So we're making history, right, with this virtual and online member meeting this year. And along those lines, this year, for the first time ever, we are voting online. We're going to use a secure election site called Election Buddy. And I'm going to explain how voting is going to work. So voting will open up, well, about now, 12 noon, right after the meeting, and is going to close at 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday. So if we have your email address, you should receive an email from ARISE around now with instructions on how to vote. And the subject line will say, "Vote Now, Alabama ARISE 2021 Issue Priority Selection." What that means is that we will not know our issue agenda today, and that will be announced later this week. But if you have any questions at all about the voting process, we encourage you to contact our staff. I see that Debbie just put that contact information in the chat, so feel free to save that for future reference. And let's see here, we can go on to the slide about rules for voting and numbers of votes for groups and individuals. Okay, Some reminders about how Arise votes on these issues, what our rules are around these. Individual members will receive 5 votes to distribute among the priority issue proposals. Member group representatives receive 7 votes. Votes can be distributed in any way you choose among the 7 proposed issues. But only the top five issues with the most votes will officially join our 2021 legislative agenda. Okay, so that's how voting is going to work this year. I'll give a quick membership update at this point now. As a reminder, Arise is structured as a member-led organization. One of our primary membership benefits is having the ability to drive our legislative agenda. If you're not already a member or representing a member group, you won't be able to vote in this year's process, but you can still join us to participate in next year's membership meeting. We set a goal a few years ago to reach 2,020 individual members by 2020, but COVID put a wrench in our plans and we didn't quite get there this year. We have held steady and continued to grow our membership, and we need your help to continue to grow. You can see up there on the screen where our current numbers are around membership. You can support Arise by joining as an individual member today by donating at whatever level you are able. We ask for at least $15 to join, but many of our members give at the $50 level if they're able. But we do not exclude anyone from joining at any level of giving. Each member gets the same number of votes. We also invite you to look over our list of member groups, which include faith-based, nonprofit, and civic partner groups. If your organization is not yet a member group but would like to be, please reach out to our staff or board for more information about joining. We hope you will continue to give and support our democratic member-led process with your sustained membership, and we're so grateful for all of you who are members. And now we'll move on to the business meeting portion of our agenda.
And I just want to say thank you all for bearing with us. We're 10 minutes over where we thought we would be, but I think we can knock out our business meeting really quickly. So Kathy, it's over to you.
Great. Thank you again so much for staying with us through this meeting and learning about the new issues, possibilities. If you see the budget in front of you on your screen, we have experienced a lot of growth in our budget this year, primarily due to 2 large grants that were designed to grow our Medicaid expansion campaign. And Robin introduced you to the new staff members that we were able to add at the beginning of the meeting. We ended our last year, fiscal year, very strong, and we exceeded the revenue estimates that we had. Our budget is just under 1.5 million for fiscal year 2021. While we did budget to have fewer members in 2021, as William was just saying, we really hope that you will continue to give generously and keep on track with our goal to keep up, to grow our membership giving, because, you know, we never know what the next year will bring in terms of grant funding. We've been fortunate this year, but don't know about next year. And one other thing that I will point out is that we did receive a PPP loan related to the coronavirus response last year, which helped us deal with the slightly lower amount of member giving. And with that, William, I think the correct procedure is that as the Finance Committee, we bring forward a motion to approve the 2021 budget as presented.
Yep, that's correct. And there's a poll up on the screen now for members to vote. I'll let those votes keep coming in.
It looks like we've had a majority of attendees vote yes. So
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you for that approval. We'll move on to our nominating committee report from Gary Moore. Gary with us?
I think you're on mute, Gary.
There he is.
Yes, I was lost there for just a second. Thank you. I'll make this abbreviated so that we don't compete with your lunch plans. First of all, thank you all for being here. And thanks to all those who've agreed to be members of our board. As the chair of the nominating committee, I thank them very much for their service. I thank everyone for looking for diversity, for depth, and for differences so that we are better representative of the state of Alabama. And I wanted you to know that our bylaws require at least 50% of board members to represent low-income member groups or communities. I think that's very important to our mission. On the screen, you're looking at what we see as our current board membership, and subject to your voice and vote, there are 3 new board nominees who we hope to become members. In the section titled Low Income Groups, as number 8, you'll see Audrey Noel. She's a community enabler developer from Anniston. In the section for other groups, you'll see as number 7, the Reverend Clyde Jones, who is from Macedonia Missionary Baptist Church in Daphne, Alabama. And number 8, His Honor Judge Jamie Sledge. We appreciate these folks being willing to serve so that you know board membership is for a 3-year term followed by what could be an additional 3-year term. So the nominating committee of the Board of Alabama Arise makes this recommendation of these wonderful Alabamians to serve you, the membership of Alabama Arise. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Gary. So that is a recommendation from our nominating committee, and votes have come in, and that slate is approved, it appears. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I think that's all the business we have to do today. And I just want to say briefly, William, I'm sorry I cut you off, but I'm so excited to welcome these new board members and also just show you the faces of our current board because they're fantastic. And I wanted to jump in right here and say that William Blackerby is rolling off our board, as well as Sister Marilyn Graff. And they have been tremendous assets and leaders on our board. They were with me throughout my onboarding as the new director of Arise, and I'm going to miss them both terribly. So I just wanted to say personally, thank you to William for being our board president. Thank you to Sister Marilyn for your leadership on our legislative committee. Kathy, I know Kathy's going to be stepping into our role as our next board chair, and I was hoping you might want to say a few words as well.
Absolutely. I have enjoyed so much getting to know both William and Sister Marilyn, and it has been just a joy to work with both of them. And we will miss Sister Marilyn very much, but we know she's not going anywhere. So we know that we'll be still hearing from her. William, thank you so much for all you've done in your leadership and guidance in this past year, especially with the COVID challenges, and it's been an honor to work alongside with you. So thank you so much for your service over the years for Alabama Arise.
Thank you, Kathy. It has been an honor and a pleasure. I'm finding myself I'm going to miss this board and getting to see these folks from all over the state who care so deeply about these issues. And just to exercise a little bit of privilege here while I've got the mic, I really want to thank the amazing Alabama Arise staff as well. Always amazing for all the hard work they do. I see some applause happening there. I wish we had our applause reaction emojis available, but it's an amazing group. They put a lot of work into making today happen. So thank you for all of that. Okay, to wrap us up, I believe that Reverend Carolyn Foster has a few parting words to share.
I too want to just thank everybody for their time, their attention, and their patience during this very different, yet very effective, and as you said, William, very history-making annual meeting. May we all be guided and strengthened today and in the days to come in the work of Alabama Arise, so that we may continue to serve all God's people, especially those who are vulnerable, marginalized, and oppressed. And I would like to close us out with a prayer. So let us pray. Almighty and eternal God, so draw our hearts to you, so guide our minds, so fill our imaginations, so control our wills, that we may be wholly yours, utterly dedicated to you. And then use us, we pray, as you will, and always to your glory and for the welfare of your people. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday.